I really do think that if it wasn't for the trail that you blazed, Lauren Daigle would not be who she is and where she is today.
That's interesting.
Oh, so many people have said that.
Really?
Yes. I won't get into it because I have a lot of grievances about like what the industry did after
I came out?
Yeah.
They do it. They've been doing it. I wasn't the first person that's gone down that way, and I won't be the last. I couldn't stand watching that happen, using music that was popular. Hey, be like Jen. And I'm like, no. I never said any of that. You're fine the way that you are. I put my guitar in the case and I shut it, and I didn't play my guitar for 7 years.
Wow.
Yep, that was it.
You were having to identify why you deserved integrity. And within that community was the same messaging and influence that also told you that you had to take all of those things that made up Jennifer Knapp and who she was and pack them inside that guitar case that you didn't open for 8 years. This is Rooted Recovery Stories. I'm Patrick Custer, your host. So excited to be here. It is Pride Month, and I've got such a special episode that we are launching today with my friend, Grammy-nominated singer-songwriter Jennifer Knapp.
Hello.
Welcome to the show. I almost said welcome to Nashville, but that would be so inappropriate.
I live here now.
I know.
So I've lived here now for well over a decade, and it's not even the first time I've lived here. So.
Oh, you moved away and then came back?
I lived here. I moved here probably like late 90s, early 2000s, I think. Lived here for a few years. I should put that in air quotes because I toured so much at the time. I basically came home, threw all my dirty laundry in the closet, and then packed up and left to go out on the road again. But no, I moved away and lived overseas for about 6 to 8 years. And then came back in 2010 and moved back here to Nashville.
Where overseas?
Mostly lived in Sydney, Australia.
Okay, yeah, that's adding up in my brain now.
I've got me Aussie stars, mate. Nice. They're right there.
I like that. I like that. That a dialect. You're doing a good job. Impression, whatever. It's cool. I'm not. But
I won't judge you. I won't. I promise.
I want to start off by saying Pride Month is definitely my favorite month of stories that we do all year long because there's so many reasons I won't get into. We embrace, I think, one of a really good tenet about human healing and just the human existence on this show, I think, being that everyone is healing and or recovering from something. People oftentimes say, well, I thought Rooted Recovery Stories was just about, people recovering from addiction, and that couldn't be further from the truth. We do tell a lot of people's stories about recovery from addiction, but we are all healing from some type of thing, or we're all suffering, in a place of suffering. And your story, I think, is one that is just so encouraging and so empowering. We just came off the heels of the Concert of Love and Acceptance, Ty Herndon and Glad's production here in Nashville that kicked off CMA Fest. And it was so great to see you perform there. And on that sentiment of love and acceptance, that wasn't always there, I think, internally for you, from what I gather.
Well, it's that. I mean, I think that quality has definitely been probably the mark of at the root of my work that I've done for the last 30 years. And why I started kind of singing and songwriting was basically from that place. I mean, for those who don't know kind of how I got my start in music, I did get started in the contemporary Christian music world.
Yes.
And at the time it was like one of the things that I did in my life was just trying to figure out who I wanted to be and who I was, particularly as a young adult. Screwed up in my head, screwed up with family relationships, not really knowing what I wanted to do. And Christianity was one of the places that I landed. And then in the process of that kind of spiritual place, started writing and doing a lot of work in that space and started journaling around. That's set the groundwork for even what I'm doing today. But go ahead. Yeah.
Let me ask you though, because and you talked about this yesterday too from the stage, that certain things that you were struggling with are what led you to, because there's a lot of us here, especially in the South, we were like youth group kids, right? Like we grew up in church, and you were like making it clear, like that wasn't me. Some stuff happened, and I was the kid that people were saying, hey girl, you need some Jesus in your life.
Well, actually, it was the youth group kids essentially that got me saved. So I put that in air quotes. So as a freshman in college, I mean, my friends in college were picking me up off of the like the dorm room lawn in the morning, and I didn't know where I was at. I mean, I was pretty like wild and not really just not really kind of, I didn't have myself together at all. And so my evangelical friends, my youth group kid friends in the late 90s were like, girl, you got to get right with the Lord. And they thought, that if I just got religious and I got, stopped sinning, again, I'm using air quotes, that would be something that saved me. And so, it was strange because if I fast forwarded ahead 2 years, 2 or 3 years, I was now doing music for those same youth groups that I never grew up in. It was such a weird culture shock when I actually did go into it, because I didn't grow up around church every day. I mean, I was a Kansas kid. So my grandma went to church every Sunday. We prayed over Thanksgiving and Christmas meals and every meal that my grandmother sat on the table. But it wasn't like we were going to youth group or anything like that. So
did you go what was with your parents? What was your relationship with around like God, the conversation around God and what have you growing up?
There wasn't one. I mean, it wasn't unfriendly or friendly. It just wasn't there. I mean, I don't think, one of the things I think I would say about where I grew up is the culture of just about everyone around me, including my family, was that God existed in some way. There's a church on every church corner. You didn't hear anybody talk about being an atheist or being anti-God. But you'd also hear, I remember my grandfather at particular times, well, I guess I'm going to hell for that one. And he's not a church going guy or necessarily God fearing guy, but I think in the back of our minds, there was always kind of this idea of judgment or this, gray bearded entity in the skies that persisted everywhere you went. So even if you didn't go to church on Sunday, you got an idea of what church people thought about you when you were, having sex before marriage, or if you had a little bit too much to drink, or if, you had a divorce, anything on on the spectrum of bad things, But, even as much as, that family doesn't go to church, so it can be even more subtle than that. But that's kind of that's what I grew up in. And my family, like I said, we would go to a church 2-3 times a year, Christmas, Easter, that kind of thing, when it seemed appropriate to participate in that festival, so to speak. And then all of a sudden, I get launched into an evangelical community where it was every day a week, Bible studies all day long. Only thing that you listen to is Christian music, which I had no idea that was a thing.
How old were you at that time?
I think I was 18 when I said yes. Probably took me another year to go, okay, maybe I'll follow through on the yes.
Yeah.
And then I think and within a year of that, I was regularly participating in my church and part of worship teams and things like that.
Where was that, in Kansas or where?
Yeah, largely, yeah.
Okay. And so then what led to you doing Christian? Were you already doing music before?
Well, I was a trumpet player. I went to university as a
wow,
playing trumpet, and I played guitar a little bit, but not very well. I didn't aspire, what I do today is nothing like what I aspire to be doing, but I did have musical knowledge, to that degree. But what got me started in Christian music, one, I didn't know it existed. I really had no clue. I mean, I thought, there was church that happened inside of music that happened inside of church.
Right.
But I had no idea there was stuff on the radio.
The commercial Christian music.
That there were rock stars inside of, contemporary Christian music. I'd never heard of DC Talk or, anything like that. Or the Lauren Daigles of the time. Nothing like that.
No, I was just thinking about how you said DC Talk. I'm like, everyone under the age of 30 just said who?
Right. No. But at the time, that was a groundbreaking act,
yes.
When I was growing up. But I didn't know any of that.
Yeah.
And so, but that's all the my friends were listening to. And so unbeknownst to me, kind of how I got started was like, so now here I was hanging out in this Christian space, and all my friends were like, well, you can't listen to the Indigo Girls anymore, and you can't listen to Tracy Chapman, and you can't listen to secular music if you're serious about your faith.
Was the inner lesbian in you going, oh,
well,
I can't
if I'd have known then, like now I'm kind of realizing why I never gave it up. I just couldn't quit you. I never really gave it up. I never really took it seriously. But my friends were like, even like when I was doing cover songs and practicing playing other songs from other artists that I grew up enjoying, my friends were like, well, you should try and learn some of these Christian songs. And when I started to write, they were like, you should start writing songs about your faith. So that's kind of how I got started. Like, I think the good news was that because I had no idea about writing for that genre, I was just in my room writing songs about my faith relatively authentically. Like, I wasn't worried about I was kind of new to the dialect.
Yes.
Inside of that community. So I didn't speak like them.
You didn't speak fluent Christianese?
No, or Christianese, right? Is kind of one of the things that's said about it. So I didn't speak fluent Christianese, but I still was praying. I was still trying to center. I was still on a journey of discovering what about me was worth having dignity. What about me was really worth recovering. What I was trying to learn how to stand up straight and how to love myself. And
can I just pause and say 1 second? You just said I was trying to find out what about me was worth having dignity.
It genuinely was, like, and I will say that every day. And that was, to me, the core, and even the core of why I persist in faith community in my conversation with that community today, is because at that point, one of the things I often say is, regardless how you feel about religion or God, you can be an atheist. But I think even if you're an atheist and I say to you, God doesn't love you and God wants you dead, I think you get the ultimate insult and the ultimate loss that I mean. So even if, and then imagine how much more catastrophic that is if that actually does have value to you and there is that connection. So, I understood something about myself, and I came kind of demanding my faith experience, which promised me that God saw me and that God loved me. And I was in a space going, well, look at this hot mess. And if that's true, because I was skeptical of my religious experience even when I started. And I'm not sure I'm less skeptical today, even though I'm still here. But I was so skeptical of it. I was like, well, if something positive can happen in this place and in this experience with me, then okay. And I almost dared. It was like a dare going, because I don't see it. I don't know why God would love me. I didn't know why anyone would love me. I didn't know why because I couldn't see it for myself. So what was helpful, I think, to some degrees is like, definitely there was the idea of like clean living inside of Christianity. Yeah. So the expectation of that.
This was definitely during the time of when you're talking about clean living, we're talking about, what was his name? Josh, where you'd pledge that you would
the purity culture.
Yeah, the purity culture,
true love waits and all that stuff.
Yeah,
well, that was pre a few years before I got there.
It was
a few years after I got there.
Okay. Yeah.
Because that was about the time I started getting out of that movement of Christianity. But we can skip to that later. But it was definitely once, like, here I am in college, right? And it cracks me up because, like, what college kid isn't like playing the field and figuring out who you are, who you love, who excites you, and that's sex and all things like that. Not necessarily in some horrifically dangerous, hedonistic way, but our hormones are on fire and we're getting to know who we are as young adults. And now all of a sudden it's like the lid goes on top of all that because the place that I was in was absolutely no sex before marriage. So that launched me into a whole other feminist conversation I could get into about what the expectations were as a young woman. But having had all those experiences, I'd had sex before, I'd had relationships before. And then I get into this culture that says, oh, well, that makes you a used woman. I'm like, no, I'm coming here for no shame. The promise in this space was no shame. And I'm claiming that. And I'm trying to, like, in this space, I'm starting to get a little bit of those nuggets about my own sense of self. Like, I don't have to keep living in the past. I can move forward, because what I wanted to do for the first time in my life, particularly as a young adult, going, oh, here's a vision of the person that I want to be. Here's a person of the things that I wish that I hadn't done, but I want to learn from those mistakes and I want to move forward. I didn't want to sit there and like flog myself and self-flagellate, or what I was seeing a lot at the time. You know, my friends would go out, get drunk, get on a bender, and then they'd be at the altar again on every Sunday, just going, please, God, forgive me. And I'm like, man, nah, like it's not that forgiveness isn't really crucial, or recognizing things that we want to do better in our lives isn't incredibly important. Right. Or any of the regret.
Well, you're talking about two different kinds of right? Like what you're describing with those people is fear-based actions and motive that isn't an actual relationship with anything. It's I want to avoid a negative consequence that I'm scared of.
Absolutely. But there are things that we do wrong. Like, one of my favorite things to talk about, like maybe like the difference between guilt and shame, right? There's some, like, say there's that one thing that we do wrong, or it's a wrong. It's harmed us. It's harmed someone else in that space. The difference between and shame. So here's what I would say is that shame is actually really incredibly unuseful. It makes us feel bad. But if I actually do something wrong, I can make an attempt to repair it. I can acknowledge that, but shame's not really going to do anything. But guilt can help me respond to that in a positive way. I can actually recover from something that I've done in the mode of guilt. But shame is not helpful for recovery. Right. Shame is just, it's almost even self-serving in some way. It's useful. It's a way that people can use against us as well.
How would you describe, like, if you were to say and encapsulate how you've experienced or have experienced shame, how would you describe it?
How would I experience shame? I think most of the time I've experienced it at the hands of others more than I've experienced it in a sense of self. And maybe that's me talking now after 30 years of kind of moving on from that. But I think maybe 30 years ago, I would have experienced shame then. It probably is believing what other people said. You've done this, and this is, or you are this way, or this is something that you've done, and you're a bad person because of it. And I'd be like, especially if it's something that I'd done, you're right. I've done that because I couldn't deny it. Therefore, I should feel about myself the same way you're viewing me. And I think the major shift in my life was going, no, just because you say I'm a bad person because I've done something, I can acknowledge that what I've done is bad. But what I aim to do is make this right. And what I aim to do as a human being in my life is to not repeat that mistake again as well. So, which for me actually was a context that made sense to me inside of Christianity. We're talking about an ability to be forgiving. We're talking about something that's redemptive. I mean, these are all words that you hear inside of Christianity that to me are applicable no matter where you are. You don't have to be religious to understand how holy that can be, and how like whole making, WHOLE, that can be when you give somebody the opportunity to go raise their hand and say, yeah, like I don't always do what I want. I've screwed up, but the shame part of it is believing that we are bad because we've done something bad, believing that we are bad because we are struggling with something. That insufficiency that only kind of handcuffs us. And I think the moment that I understood somewhere in there the distinction between doing something bad and being bad was a day that I was able to kind of start going, okay, I am now going to take actions to learn how to do something different if I or to learn how to not repeat a behavior, but to look at a behavior or an action or something I'm participating with in and evaluate whether or not I really wanted to do the work to change that. Right. And that's not an easy thing to do. I mean, I've learned through the years, it's not easy for everybody to go, you're right, I screwed that up. You're right, I could have done better today. And it's not, and one of the reasons why I think it is so hard for us to do that, anybody on the street, is because the second we say, you're right, I did that, you open yourself up to people going, yeah, you're a piece of shit, Right. And you're like, no, I'm not. but I did do that thing wrong. And it takes a little bit of practicing that time and again when people are inclined to think an admission to doing something bad means you're bad. It takes a long time. It probably took me maybe a decade of going through little micro processes like that before I kind of get to this point now going, no, I can make that distinction.
I love that you just separated and defined how it's totally different on the other side, because I absolutely went through this metamorphosis as well, where once you've peeled those or separated the shame and the guilt thing, and what your mistakes no longer define you and make you a bad person, being able to own your mistakes when they happen is a whole different thing. It no longer involves the fear that it once did that like ruled your nervous system and life and all the, right?
Well, we were talking about like the day-to-day things. I can appreciate there are some things that might be catastrophic, right? I mean, the really big, like, I've known people who've, wrecked cars and killed people in, alcohol related, crashes. And there are some things that we have to admit in the world that we will never be able to repair. Mm-hmm. We will never be able to repair some harms that we do. And some harms against us there may not ever be anything that you could pay back or do or unscar something. And those are those amazing moments of tragedy. And they're really hard moments for us to reconcile what we're talking. I want to acknowledge that those moments are actually really hard when you start asking some people for you to acknowledge something, and people say, "Well, that's not enough. Mm-hmm. You should have never done that." And sometimes that's just the thing that really sucks about it, because there will be moments. Hopefully we don't ever do anything that we can't undo, but there might be a moment in our lives that we can undo them. And that's the tragedy, hopefully, that we work on ourselves before we get to that point.
Yeah.
And that was kind of where I was at, when I was a young adult, just going, wow, I'm playing fast and loose with my own life and other people's lives. And like one of these days I may make a decision in here. I may not make an active choice, and I may not be able to undo what's happening. I may not be able to undo the consequence of what I'm undoing. And that's when I began the work in my life to be able to say, I want to be a well-rounded human being. And for me, Christianity was part of that. And we'll skip ahead about, how helpful religion can and can't be, because I'm sure we can get into a whole conversation about recovery from religious trauma and harm.
I feel like we're in between there. I'm curious about what got you into, because there was something happened very quickly, because you were super young when this, like, it had to have been right around the same time that you released your first album that just went huge, and also it just turned 25.
The record did.
The record.
Yeah, the record just turned 25.
I always get album and record.
That's all right. Sorry. They're the same thing. An album and a record are the same thing.
Then why is there a different category in the Grammys? I still don't understand.
Really?
Album of the year, record of the year.
Really?
Yes.
I believe you.
Wait.
Is there?
Am I telling you something you don't know?
You can edit it out if you want.
No.
We won't make fun of you.
I don't know. Everybody's going to know my mistakes. It's fine. Aaron, isn't there a category, an album of the year and a record of the year at the Grammys? I know there is, because every year I'm like, what is the difference? And it drives me crazy, because yes, it's two different categories. And look it up if you don't mind, because this is,
you would think I would know that, but definitively, but I can't. I can't talk you off the ledge.
She's a Grammy nominated.
I know. I'm like, ask her.
Twice for album of the year.
I know. I'm like, why do you think
But I didn't know there was a record of the year. Maybe I should have gone for that instead.
I feel.
the performer and the production team of a single song?
Oh, so it's a song.
Yeah, both the song and record Grammys are for a single song, while the album of the year goes to a collection of songs.
Okay.
But it's not a record. There's no record category.
No, there is. Record is.
Song and record Grammys.
For a single song.
So record of the
I
year.
don't know what's the difference between a
Okay. Record of the year is song.
I don't know if there is a song of the year technically. I think
Okay, hold on. I got it.
That's how they refer to song. Yeah, it's a single track.
Maybe they'll change that for all you millennials coming through.
What are you?
I'm a Gen Xer.
Performer and the production team of the single track. Album of the year is awarded to performer, songwriters, and production team of a full album. Song of the year is awarded to the songwriters of a single song.
Okay,
All right.
song of the year is the songwriters of the single song.
I got the full muscle.
Record is for everybody behind the song, and I'm repeating what Aaron just said.
Yeah.
You're not, though.
You're learning.
Oh. Okay, basically, song of the year is for the writers. Record of the year is literally for the song and the singer and the production team, right? Basically. Yeah, so okay.
crew.
And then album is what
all the songs
the whole
on
thing.
that.
But
the record may have come from.
Can we just talk about how record and album both sound like the same thing?
No, they
and
are,
I
yeah.
just stumped a Grammy nominated, Grammy
I didn't know.
nominated.
I learned something today. Thank you.
So, yeah. Okay, so wait.
So where were you?
Oh my gosh. This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health. If you or a loved one are struggling with trauma, addiction, or mental health, we are ready to answer your questions and help you take that next step. Call our admissions center at 888-648-4098 or visit us online at www.promises.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help. Okay, so your first album that just blew up.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I was a Christianese kid that was raised in
What flavor, by the way, and where?
What flavor?
Yeah. 'Cause
Should have bought a Hyundai, but I bought a Nissan.
Oh my goodness, you're a Pentecostal?
Hallelujah.
Oh my goodness. So in the South,
Here.
here in Nashville?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Turning the tables on you, doing my own little interview, because I judge everybody by kind of where they were from and what flavor of where they were from in terms of their Christian experience.
There's so many polar opposites about myself that don't match. I grew up in a super conservative Christian controlled house in Brentwood.
Nice.
But we went to an inner city, almost all black church, Pentecostal church on the other side of town.
Wow.
And I was homeschooled my whole life.
Nice. Classic.
Those three things are just so don't mix and are just,
That's not your typical, I don't hear a lot of stories about that, about basically a metropolitan Nashville Christian. Usually Brentwood stays Brentwood.
Yes.
I mean, it's usually it's really genuinely white evangelical in most spaces like that.
Yeah.
And
everybody
so-
I knew that I grew up around was either Methodist or Baptist or maybe some Presbyterians.
I mean, I don't want to be monolithic about it or necessarily typecasting or
Right.
trying to pigeonhole anybody. But I mean, you can kind of know what neighborhoods do.
Yes.
It's
well,
kinda
and
like
it was just Brentwood was what it was. I mean, it's a little different today, but anyway. But my whole point is that you were asking me. I grew up in a very that was it. It was very controlled, very all we listened to was Christian music, and so I knew,
Which was what I appreciated, and I didn't until years later, is that most environments like that, and particularly a generation of people who I ended up playing for, were homeschooled or in groups or went on to Christian universities and things like that. So the culture, literally all the art, all the pop ephemera, all the things inside of that space were Christian things. I mean, there was a huge market for that. We basically had our own cultural ecosystem happening in that space. I just, it was bizarre to me because I got into it basically by accident. I mean, all those same people were already doing that and had that world, at the time, and so all my friends were playing me these Christian music, and I'm like, oh wow, that's interesting.
So what's interesting is,
But
so
only a
in
couple
my
years
brain,
after that.
I lump you into everybody in that 10-year time span. So I'm interested to know, when you were thrust in, who were the the names that were big at the moment before you got, because when you got big and you were big alongside of them immediately.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting though. And, you know, somebody can test my CCM history on this, but at the time there weren't a lot of mainstream artists like me, but a lot of...
There was none.
I mean, Margaret Becker was one of the only other women with guitar that I'd ever seen inside of the Christian music space. At the time, there were artists like Twyla Paris. I think Point of Grace was around, like, you know, 3 or 4 beautiful women on stage. At the same time, I'm, you know, as this short, rough kid from Kansas, sweating and sawing through my guitar. So I was like, okay, that's not me. And like Jeff Moore in the distance, Stephen Curtis Chapman was probably the only kind of guitar equivalent parallel that I would have had, but he was a dude. And yeah, Michael
Amy
W.
Grant
Smith
was
was
around,
on the way.
but she was probably in the midst of everybody calling her out for...
Yeah, Amy wasn't doing a lot of work at that point, had kind of taken off. And I think her divorce was going to be maybe a year or two after I started playing. But so there wasn't a lot of that. But at the same time, I would say in the mid-90s, there was a lot of kind of underground and kind of these rogue independent Christian music labels that weren't doing necessarily worship music like you see today. They were like, there were ska bands coming out of the West Coast. There were groups like the 77s that were doing kind of this West Coast rock and roll. There were teenage girls getting up on the stage, kind of pre-Gwen Stefani even, like going out there and just being surfer chicks and hanging out with the dudes and being the front chicks for bands. And I was playing in a lot of coffee houses in the Midwest where it was kind of one of these side products of all these kind of youth group kids growing up, going to college, starting coffee houses and doing our own music the way that we wanted to do them. And I was playing in this club up in Kansas City called New Earth Coffee House, where groups like Sixpence None the Richer were coming through at the time. Yeah. And those guys were touring around before they ever got signed, touring around like all across the country out of Texas. They were coming up doing clubs in Kansas City. I got opening spots for these guys, freaking out because I could hardly play even 20 minutes worth of music, but our clubs were packed. And, you know, those college kids go home and they go to their schools, and they had coffee houses at their local church or at their local campus. So I'd go to the campus and play shows. Well, within a year of me pulling out my guitar and starting playing these shows in these environments, I was starting to get bookings like through Fellowship of Christian Athletes, through a bunch of college students going hither and yon all across the country. And then pretty soon I get a call from Toby McKeon, who is basically one of the guys from DC Talk, started his own record company out of Goatee Records. And they're like, yeah, Toby McKeon wants to sign you to a record deal. I'm like, who's that? I didn't know one of the biggest acts. I mean, that's still how clueless I was at the time about what was going on. But that was all in the scope of about 2 years. I mean, I was still even maybe a little bit on the fence about how I was going to deal with the cultural differences that I had inside of the faith community. I mean, the idea is that I would go play some days and I would just sing a song that meant something to me, and then somebody would go, oh, you can't introduce the song because you're a woman and we don't allow preaching from women in this space. And I was like, what? I don't understand. And so all of this kind of weird things that sometimes we kind of poke fun at Christianity, I didn't really understand. But at the same time, like for every weird thing, I got to also the privilege of going around to so many different other churches and seeing people from California to the Northeast to Florida to Alaska and just all over, and realizing I couldn't really put my finger on exactly what the Christian was. So anyone that said, oh, this is the Christian, I was like, you don't know what you're talking about, because you are on the same page, but you're close. But the defining thing that kind of kept me going and kept me writing was just my absolute joy of being able to put your heart into that space, keep faith in the idea that it's a good work to want to know, to want to be a better human being, and to see something in this story, which I could see in Christianity. I could see that story as something that I was a person of worth, a person of value, there's a parable after parable after parable of Jesus going, really, the least of these. There's no excuse. You never see Jesus going, yeah, that guy, take him down. Like, it never happens. At every turn, it's about it's about seeing the heart and the absolute thing to pluck someone out and take and say, yes, I will take, yes, even that one. I will take even you. And I'm not super comfortable with it always being couched in such a negative aspect. Like, oh, you suck, but I can take you anyway, because that's a whole other problem
Right.
that I would have inside of Christianity, theologically. And that actually became part of my work, going, no, we start out good. We're all amazing. It's just, we don't always believe it. And that is the hardest thing, I think, sometimes for us to get to, is there's plenty of evidence that we all pile up. And, I've been married for 20 years. I go, there are so many reasons why my partner has to say no to me on any given day. She knows the absolute worst in me, and she's seen it, and still she's here. And that's extraordinary to be loved through that.
Yeah.
And if I can figure that out in a day-to-day, we humans, we're not always that great to one another. Yep. But if that person across from me who's seen me on my worst day can go, you know what, you're still pretty okay. Let's start there. And still walk with me and be with me for the person I still want to be. I'm still trying to be better. I'm still learning things in my relationships. But to have those people come alongside with you comes after, I think, oftentimes we begin to believe in ourselves, and we find those other people out in our road, in our community, our friends, family. You get those people alongside of you, which is why I love Pride Month. Pride Parade used to be a protest of sorts, right? Yeah. And now it's decades later. It's way more of a celebration than it's ever been, and that allyship is not just tidy, I always remember my mom going, why do they have to be in their tidy whities? Like everybody letting their freak flag fly for Pride Parade. And it's not just that anymore. I mean, yes, it's great. But also inside of it are just the people marching down the street every year saying, we are in this together. Mm-hmm. We are good. There's no place that we wouldn't stand, love, and support and walk with you in all the challenges and all the joys and celebrations that we have together. That took so much faith for in terms of like LGBTQ history. Yeah. I have to take on board how much faith that would have taken 25 years ago, Stonewall, pre-Stonewall.
Oh my God.
Right?
So for the first time, I went to this week to the Stonewall every year kicks off Pride in New York. They do a benefit. Stonewall Gives Back. For those of you who don't know, Stonewall, brief history lesson, Stonewall Inn was a hotel/bar in New York City back in the 1960s, run by the mob. And they paid the police department off so that they would look the other way and allow people under the LGBTQ plus rainbow come and commune, basically, and gather. Because at the time, it was many states, like things that we do as homosexuals were still illegal.
Outlawed, absolutely. Yeah.
And so the protest happened. A raid took place. Some police that didn't abide by this paid off, understanding they had. They were like, no, we're gonna raid the place anyway. They came, they raided, and for the first time ever, the LGBTQ plus community came in together in support and said, no, like we don't care if those people were ready to die for the cause. Yeah. And we hear who through the first brick, it's referring to Stonewall because they were quite literally physically having to fight for their right to live and exist. Yeah. And so when you talk about today, Pride is such a celebration. It is. And I think that there's such like a coming together and an importance of the both of we celebrate in conjunction with remembering that we can celebrate today because
absolutely
it's on the shoulders.
It absolutely is. And the part of that always sits with me is how much courage it takes in a moment when others around you will not believe in your dignity. Will not give you the space to do that, and how much effort it takes. And this is the unfortunate part, right? On any like the ultimate like individual journey and the loneliness that is any of ours to live. It takes so much of our own individual courage to say, no, I will be seen, I will be heard, I am worth this effort. This is where, to literally hold out and fight sometimes if necessary for our space to be able to hold on to that dignity. That's how valuable it is. But it is hard work, and we often capitulate sometimes in ways that we don't even realize that we've done that. And,
Absolutely.
And to turn that tide when other people have been surprised that we will stand up for ourselves is also very hard one to turn. It's almost as hard as code switching. One day somebody says, you're a piece of shit, and you go, yeah, I believe you, I believe you, I believe you. And the next day you go, no, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not a piece of shit. And you start working in that direction. To get people to come alongside you and outnumber that is really hard. It's really hard fought ground to be able to get. It's a real joy when people come and become an ally with you in those kinds of journey, which is why I think they're really sacred relationships to be able to have, which is why I put such a high premium on the expectations of faith communities inside of those spaces, particularly with the LGBTQ community, which I've been an advocate for a while, just saying, listen, when you're talking about a person who hasn't been out and is going on a journey to be of self-discovery and being able to start to appropriately frame and have the relationships built on the dignity of, finally I get to say for myself who I am and what I am. And that's a really it's a spiritual journey to be able to go on, and it's a very sacred one. And the religion side of it, I'm like, no, religion is a tradition that you can practice. It's a discipline that you can practice. It's a community of people you can find, but it is not you.
Right.
It is not the same thing to say I practice Christianity versus I am a Christian. I could do probably months of podcasts on that.
Yeah.
But the idea that for it not to be understood how deeply spiritual of a recognition of oneself this is, particularly when everyone around you has been for a long time, and this is perhaps changing a little, assumes that you're heterosexual. And then secondly, to assume that if you're not, that you're in some way bad or malformed in some way, is profoundly destructive. To get into these communities and be able to talk about how we need space, our faith spaces, our spiritual spaces. We need communities as a whole to be able to understand that, and we need allies inside of that. So whether it's a faith community, whether it's, Nashville and the Pride Parade, there, sometimes it's your corporation or your business. Yeah. It's where you work. There are all kinds of ways that we can find family, community, and connection. And that's part of the joy, particularly when we talk in an LGBTQ context, of why just not just thinking that there's only one kind of people out in the world that can understand what this is. Because I think when you start normalizing the idea that we all really do want to know that we can trust the relationships that we're in and the people around us that want to see us succeed, want to see us be fruitful and be full and whole and happy in our lives and have dignity in our lives. That ought to make sense to anybody, no matter who you are or where you're from. And if you don't know that, then all I can say is I hope you find a context or a metaphor or a practice or something before it's too late. Like a practice that will allow you to see that, because if you haven't, the second that I'm convinced that people who haven't seen it in themselves don't know how to see it in others.
1,000%. And I want to take it back just a second and ask you, so if you didn't, there was a time before you saw it in yourself. And I hear you saying that even at the beginning, in the genesis of your faith, that you knew what you were like, no, I got a message and I bought into the parts that I liked about this, and I'm going to fight for it because I'm not just drinking Kool-Aid.
That might be a bit of a revisionist history, but I certainly didn't want to be drinking Kool-Aid. That's for sure.
Right.
Because I was so skeptical. Yeah.
And so, because so many of us, we were just like, following along. We were doing the inherited version of Christianity, right? And you were doing the let me see what I'm you were asking some questions about what you're buying into.
I was a weird kid
Yeah.
that didn't know the emperor had. I didn't know the emperor. I was like, everyone can see the emperor didn't have any clothes, right? Like, I didn't know that you weren't supposed to say that out loud.
I absolutely love that. So when we talk about though I want to dive in for just a second and talk about the religious trauma. What was yours, and how did you heal from it during that time? I mean, because you were thrust into the spotlight, national tours. Your album was like #1. I mean, it
did okay.
It did okay.
It did okay. When I quit, I actually thought I'd failed. So I didn't really understand that it had been as successful as it had.
Wow.
I genuinely didn't.
Very,
I felt
very
like,
interesting to hear.
Sorry.
No, yeah, it's, thank you for sharing that, because I would have never thought that. So, but take us back there.
Yeah.
What was that for you?
I mean, I feel like I have friends who have sincerely experienced religious trauma,
Yep.
like deconversion therapies. You're going to get kicked out of the house unless you go to this camp to make you ungay. You know, that's not been my experience. I think for sure I would say that I've always lived in a state of unease. Probably my entire Christian experience, maybe up until now. And then, you know, as I came to the end of my contemporary Christian music career, became increasingly unsettled and feeling inauthentic. But I don't know that I would throw trauma into the mix for myself personally, just out of due respect for people who have just genuinely had earth-shattering paradigm shifts to their whole worldview.
Sure.
But that being said, I mean, I think part of the biggest challenge for me is how much I experienced. Like, mine came through vocation. I mean, my job had so much riding on it. If I didn't fit in, then I was not only letting, you know, my prospects of employment down. Like, I was not only going to lose my job as a musician, which I loved and enjoyed and very much, you know, I didn't see the end of. Like, I was surprised by it and loved it. It was good, and I there wasn't anything wrong with that. But I started to have a real problem, and you'd mentioned it a little bit earlier about the time, I think around 2000, 2001, there started to be a cohesive campaign in and around True Love Waits. So it was this purity movement that got branded. Now daddy-daughter dances were happening, and little, you know, daddies were putting rings on their fingers.
I had one.
Yeah, you know, there was a lot going on there. And at this point in time, I was in my late 20s, definitely viewing myself as becoming a woman at that point, getting ideas of my own, and my experience and my confidence in what I thought about my faith had been going on my 4 or 5 years. So I thought, you know, I had some ground to be able to speak and have ideas of my own. And I saw this happening. And as a person who'd been sexually active in my life, watching people getting sexually shamed in this department was just not going to happen. I just didn't want it happening on my watch. It made me so sick. It made me so sick to my stomach, and it seemed so counterintuitive to the faith that had been really redemptive for me. In everything that I've ever written, and even what I do now, there is nowhere that I go than in any influence that I have, whether it's in my life, my daily life, or in my art, that I want anyone walking away from me thinking any less of themselves. And like, think more of yourself. You're worth that.
Yeah.
Like, I may not even know the answer to that. Tell me, share that with me. You know, this is a gift you are to the world. Like, I love that in my work.
Yeah.
Like, to me, it's even more the reason why I do my work than music and playing. It's watch people fall in love with themselves and then open and blossom up to the world is it's one of the most radiant, beautiful things you'll ever see. I couldn't stand watching that happen, using music that was popular. Hey, be like Jen. And I'm like, no. I never said any of that. You're fine the way that you are. You know, that's what I was trying to say. And people would go pull me off the side and go, you can't say that anymore. You need to tell them not to have sex before marriage. I'm like, I'm not going to tell them to have sex. I'm not going to tell them, I'm not going to tell anybody what to do with their body.
Right.
I'm not. I'm going to tell them whatever you do with your body, do it well. Like take care of you and take care of other people. That's the most I'll say. If you want me to say anything at all, if it's my business at all.
Right.
So I started to have those kinds of real problems of this. And it's kind of one of the things that I think, and I don't know if it evolved to be that or like evangelical Christianity as people kind of understand it today. Like if you hear somebody say, oh, I'm a Christian, I think it's very easy people to assume that you're voting Republican, that you're, a no sex before marriage, heteronormative, and it's actually really not true. It really isn't. There are faith communities out there that are super queer. Yeah. There are pastors that are queer. There are, there's so many different, and it's not just queer. They're black, white, liberal, conservative. There are all kinds of Christians happening out there. This does not belong to just one kind of space. And if anything, that became so uncomfortable to me that I was then becoming a marketable representative of that. And it just became so difficult for me to be that I was just like, it was so incongruent to my brain, so incongruent to my personal experience that I just said, I can't participate in that anymore. And it was terrifying because, that was traumatic because I definitely had to make that choice because in the sense that I couldn't continue to say yes to doing things because I wouldn't be allowed to do them anyway. And I either had to stay quiet and do that, which to me would have been disingenuous, right, or to proceed, or to quit because I just couldn't.
So what did you do? Was there you said, I'm done?
Yeah. Around about 2000, I did my last show as a contemporary Christian music artist in 2002, which is 22 years ago, which is so funny. I'm talking about this like it was just yesterday. But I took me a year to clear off my calendar. I told everybody for a year before that, I was like, I'm going to quit. And then I quit, and then I had to clear off a year's worth of contracts. And then it was in September 2002. I remember I wish I could remember the show. I'm sure I've got it on a calendar somewhere, but I walked over, I put my guitar in the case and I shut it, and I didn't play my guitar for 7 years.
Wow.
Yep. That was it. Cause it hurt so much that's where the pain set in. I lost a community in that. I lost friends inside of that. I lost a sense. I chose, obviously I made a decision, but I knew that and at that time I'd been celibate for 10 years. So I'd lost part of my life to like pleasing everybody else. But it took another probably 7 or 8 years for me to process how catastrophic it was and how when I shut that case, I shut so much of myself inside of it. And I said, oh, I don't get to do that anymore. And particularly as I fell in love and I met my partner and I started to develop that relationship, I'm like, wow, now I don't have even the spirituality that I practice or my faith that's been important to me now. And I believed people for a very long time. It's like, you don't get to have that. Mm-hmm. You are disqualified from being a participant in a faith community because you're gay now. And I'm like, oh, and I believed that. And it took me a long time to figure out who, past my anger, past my rage, past the things that were hurting inside of me. I squared those things around, took me a long time. And then as those started happening, then I went, okay, what are the things that I want to do now that I'm kind of fit? And you start to realize sometimes that there are things you aren't doing because you're afraid. Yeah. Right. As opposed to, you're laying back over doing the things like going out and holding the hand of your lover. Why? Not because you don't want to do that, but because you're afraid of somebody seeing you. You're afraid of telling somebody something about you because, not because you're afraid of a physical harm, but because it's going to change the context or what you may or may not be allowed to do, right, or what somebody might view you in some different way. And instead of being afraid of them, I just kind of went like, when I first picked up my guitar for the first time, I was like, well, if I pick this up and I write a song and I play, what if it's good? Like I was so terrified of like even writing, like if it sucks and I don't want to do this, I was kind of hoping that it would suck. I was hoping that when I picked up my guitar to play, like I wouldn't have to deal about anything in the future.
Well, and you're broaching the subject of like how I think the blossom of your healing was taking place. And I just want to encapsulate really quick and take it full circle when, you know, you said, well, I just want to like kind of level this and say, I know all these people went through like the heavy trauma and what have you, but what you described, I feel like you disqualified your own. You just told me about how an entire industry, like you started off by finding a faith that brought you what you were having to identify why you deserved in all the ways that you deserved integrity. And within that spectrum of that perspective and that community was the same messaging and influence that also told you that you had to take all of those things that made up Jennifer Knapp and who she was and pack them inside that guitar case that you didn't open for 8 years.
I've never really, I appreciate that actually. I'm listening to that. I'm like, I think one of the challenges of that is because it never came from one human being. I think because it's so social, it's such a big structure, right? It's such a big social community that I would have never thought, because like it's so seemingly amorphous and big, so it doesn't have a name or a face that you can point to and it's like, it's that guy. That guy did it.
Which makes it one of the most dangerous things that so many of us don't even realize why, like, harmful coping behaviors start. And I'm not saying this happened for you, but many of us who get in such discomfort, inability to regulate our emotions, we get so uncomfortable in our own skin because we've had the Chinese water torture, the dripping
it just keeps going.
A large community. You can't put a face on it. And we tend to, not just you, everybody, we compare the trauma and say, but I wasn't raped. I wasn't this. I wasn't that. And if you can't put a face on it, it's really hard to, but when we talk about it in this.
But it also makes it makes it easy. And I would say that it makes it easy for people who are leading inside of the spaces or even sitting in pews, if that's what you want to say. It makes it easier for all of us to go, well, I'm not part of the problem. It makes it, well, I didn't do it. It was it makes it a real challenge for us to be able to, I think it kind of, what you're saying lends to the fact that there are people who are inside of those spaces who don't really see their own agency to be part of the change that needs to happen.
That's it. And that's what I want to ask you is that in your healing process, I know we're about out of time, and I think this is the gold of the part of your story that we're telling today. In your healing process, what was it that changed for you and took you to the place where you were able to jump back into your own skin and pull those pieces out of your guitar case and live inside of Jennifer Knapp again?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so hard to say. Like, there's so many things that happened so quickly, but I think the beginning of that was just definitely getting to a spot of challenging myself to open up that guitar case. Like, I knew something about that was representative. I've been there before, in my life. I'd obviously had that experience in my early 20s and said I knew I was a person of dignity and worth. So I'd kind of gone through that practice. So I had this other point where I could do that and open that up and say, I'm going to test myself. I'm going to see if this is going to hold true and be sustaining. And I think moving kind of well forward ahead, getting up to the courage point to be able to then, like, that music, doing that act led to a series of events where before I knew it, I was on a stage again playing, and people are going, oh, you're back and you're playing. And then you're going to be playing as a Christian artist. And I'm like, no, I'm not. And I'm also gay. I just want you guys to know that. Like, knowing that I was going to have to do that because I couldn't make that exchange, knowing that somewhere I'd been there before. It had already been assumed to be a lot of things. And I just, it was part of the deal. I knew myself well enough and had healed well enough to that point to know that I would have even not ended up on that stage had I not known that I had some capacity to do what was necessary to go forward and to be able to understand something about my person enough to know what my boundaries were, to know what my expectations were, how I wanted to go out and be, and how I, as much as we can, anytime we leave our homes, to be understood as who we are. All you can do is do your best and know yourself as well as you can, go out and live that and act that out, right? Yeah. And then I was okay with that because I'd already been through the judgment of that. So the LGBTQ stuff that I knew that lay ahead of me was scary, but I was like, I know, like I'd been in a relationship for 6 years. I had like my friends and my family, the people in my daily life who knew me and affirmed me, my community, my church, my people of faith that knew me and knew how hard that I'd worked to get to that point. We're like, go for it. We stand by you. Maybe this will be successful. Maybe you'll get to play again and maybe you won't. And I'm like, well, I'm a singer-songwriter. Like, I'm still at the mercy of anyone liking a song. Like, you go out there and play a song and people either take it
That's right.
or they don't. And you go through that practice enough. And it's a scary, horrible process, but it makes it a little bit easier. Like, I'm not to everybody's taste artistically, but also sometimes life is just like that. But it doesn't mean that I have to crumble underneath of that, nor does it mean that I have to be ashamed of who I am when you disapprove of me or and that's been a huge part of that journey for me. And it's been an asset to find yet another, like, I wondered one of the things, like when I came back and played, if I didn't have a message or a meaning, if I didn't have a career, if anybody would like what I was doing. And because I was like, I just playing for money just wasn't that appealing to me. It's like, I like playing. It's fun. I love my job. But at the same time, I didn't know what my life was going to be like without connecting to people. I had no idea it would be what it is today. But I'm so, strangely enough, I feel way more connected to an audience and a community just because I get to go out and play and talk about what art does, which is like, hey, this is a journey I've been on, and this has been good or bad.
You're fully authentic now. So
yeah, it's
like
pretty amazing. Yeah.
You find whether you're talking like this or on stage or within your family and in relationships, when you're fully able to embrace who you are, find and say, you identify it, then you say, I accept me for who I am, and then say it to the world and give that exchange, that opportunity for them to show up and be there and be an audience. Your audience members are saying, we love Jennifer Knapp for who and what she is today.
Yeah, and obviously that's a great and huge personal benefit. The best part of going through that is that once you go through that, I get a chance to witness that every day in the lives of other people, and to be a cheerleader for that as well. And that's what keeps me going, probably more than anything else. Is every time I go into this, every time I see somebody kind of test that, test themselves and find themselves in that, and flower is one of the most beautiful things.
Yeah, it's got to be so rewarding. And I know, I think it's so wonderful to see how the essence of humility that you carry today, even when I told you about the influence that you had on me when, in coming out and feeling like you were one of the examples for me of feeling safe enough that I could be a Christian, but also come out, and that maybe I wouldn't be ostracized. Maybe I wouldn't be, because you went through stuff, but you were resilient, right? And you still found your community. I love that. And I know that you've done so much work to have conversations on different platforms. You've shown up for so many different initiatives at that intersection of faith and LGBTQ plus, equality, that the lives are countless, I'm sure, of people that you have affected. And even I know today's episode is most definitely going to, because we've got quite a broad audience, a diverse audience of people, and and some CCM lovers.
Well, it takes a few people. I'll put it in the context of a Pride Parade again. 15 years ago when I came out, there was the odd, I remember Pride Parades and the odd kind of, you might see one church person on the side of the road with a little sign that says, "We're sorry." And now in the last 15 years, I'm now seeing like churches actually hosting their Pride community celebrations. Churches, because the communities aren't doing it. So the church is like, we've got the space, we know how to do this. And they're the gathering point for the Pride celebration in their communities. Yeah. And to me, it's like, it takes one little person on the side of the street, and sometimes we're that one little person. But the more and more people that see it, just keep doing it. I'm not alone in it. I'm one in a long trial, maybe at that one little space or on that one street corner. But you look down the block, and there's 1,000 other people there, and that's what makes it. It's just turning around and being able to see people behind you. That's pretty awesome.
Most definitely. And the trails that you've blazed are just like, I love that you talk about the people behind you, because those people are behind you because you truly have blazed trails, and it might not feel like
You
they were
flipped that on
unique.
me.
It's true.
I was trying to flip it back around.
No, well, Uno reverse. But it's so true. So thank you for all that you've done in all the communities that you and I share, and for also lending your voice to this platform today and your story. I always like to ask this question towards the end. What, to that person that's identified with your story in any way, shape, or form, what word of encouragement would you like to leave for them?
Yeah. If the path you are treading today seems difficult, remember the person who comes behind you.
Ooh. I'm going to remember that. That's good, Jennifer. That is good. Also, is there anything that you would like to share about coming up that you want people to know about?
Oh, you mean like professionally?
Yes.
I can always just like push people to the jenniferknapp.com website.
Perfect.
Everything that I'm doing is on there.
We'll have all your stuff.
I've got a new record. Right, I've got a re-release of my first Christian record that's out right now. I'm doing Patreon. I'm doing a bunch of stuff in Patreon every month, and I'm also going on a cruise later on this year. So you could spend a whole week on a boat with me. So
I love that.
Mai Tais. Do they do Mai Tais on Alaskan cruises? I don't know, but anyway. But yeah, jenniferknapp.com, and you can figure out everywhere I'm going to be.
Awesome. Okay, so. Will you sing a couple bars of my favorite song before we close out?
Oh, okay. Isn't that so funny? If I don't have my guitar on, I feel totally naked right now. Am I blushing?
No, you're not. You're fine. You've sung that song so many times.
What is it?
Undo.
Oh, you want me to sing Undo Me?
Yeah.
Can you sing it with me?
No, I can't. I mean, I could, but I can't. I won't. No.
You won't even like car karaoke with me.
It would be really bad.
Oh my goodness. Well, I highly encourage you. I will only do this if maybe you even just like whisper it.
Okay, I will.
At least halfway.
I'm not
toward the end.
Okay.
I'll do the chorus for you. It's time to get down on my knees and pray. Lord, undo me. Put away my flesh and bone till you own the spirit through me, Lord. Undo me. Yeah, see, you did it. Yay. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really special. Speaking of special, our audience members, thank you so much for being here today. We love and cherish each and every one of you. We hope you do yourself. I will close out by reminding you that it is never too late to start loving yourself, and you're always only one decision away from a completely different life. This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health. If you or a loved one are struggling with trauma, addiction, or mental health, we are ready to answer your questions and help you take that next step. Call our admission center at 888-648-4098 or visit us online at www.promises.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help.